Trucks! Ladies and gentlemen, we are attempting a high wire act. We have crammed 7 whole people into our cab, which is illegal and unsafe.
It's not... Yeah. God, we're smuggling people.
Yeah, we're a pair of regular coyotes. And
Can we
the
get
Roadrunner today is lesbians.
Can we get all the lesbians to say hello?
Hey, you bunch of lesbians.
Hello.
Would we really be lesbians if we didn't have complicated feelings about the word lesbian?
No, it's kind of mandatory, I think.
So let me start with an apology for calling you all lesbians. And today we are going to be discussing Yuri manga. And when we broached the subject of discussing Yuri manga in the Discord, it turns out that a lot of people have feelings about it. And more so than Josh and I. So we're probably going to give over most of...
I'm just driving today, you guys.
Yeah, this conversation to our panel of guests. And those guests are, I'm going to shout out your name and then say hi, and if you would like a little introductory blurb, or if you wouldn't like nothing at all. Vera.
Hello.
Joelle.
Hi, I'm Joelle. I have my bachelorette's in theoretical Yuri. I'm working on the practical.
Awesome. Kat.
Hey, this is Kat. I have been trapped in the Yuri swamp for 10 terrible, terrible years.
Ranjour.
Hi, this is Ranjour. I'm a big old dyke. There's not much more to say about it.
Hazel.
Hello, I'm Hazel from the internet, and I think I accidentally ended up living inside a Friends to Lovers Yuri manga.
Sweet. And Vera, I'm going to give you one more chance to do a pithy one-liner since everybody else did one.
Oh yeah, I thought that immediately when I didn't do one and everybody else did.
Yeah, that'll
Nice.
Yeah,
So, to begin at the beginning, what is Yuri manga? I'm just throwing that out to the group. You can all tell me simultaneously if you want to.
Well, there are a couple of different definitions that are sort of overlapping and conflicting. Like, Yuri manga is specifically Japanese manga about lesbians, but it's more specific than that, because there are things that, like, would satisfy that definition but don't fit into the boundaries of the genre, because it has a whole set of associated tropes that define what Yuri is.
It's specifically romance manga with lesbians. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap in terms of tropes with stuff like shoujo manga or with, like, boys love manga, which, again, has its own set of associated conventions, but is similar enough that you can, like, read one and say, oh, I see what you're doing there, I've read this before in mine.
Can I get...
iFlop.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just remarking on the iFlop sign that we passed by.
Yes.
I missed it. We can get a look at the iFlop. Yeah, there you go.
So good.
Nice.
Nicely done. So, these tropes that you speak of, can I ask everybody to throw out a favorite trope from Yuri manga? Starting with Vera.
The aquarium date. They always go on an
The
aquarium,
aquarium
and it's not
date.
really clear where it started. It just always happens.
Yeah.
I can't explain that. That's
it
that's a
truly
deep
is in-
mystery.
I'm sorry. Truly in honor of the big lesbian herself, the ocean.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Yeah, there you go.
I think for my favorite trope, I'm gonna have to go with swords.
Swords is a
Yeah,
big one.
Yeah.
A
Combat.
lot of swords in
Generally.
Yuri.
In that
A
vein.
lot of
Specifically.
swords.
In that vein, my favorite trope of Yuri is that oftentimes, even in Yuri manga that doesn't really feel comfortable depicting butch women, which we'll probably get to later, in place of them, they'll have these girls that have princely attributes and are very specifically, the prince of the school, and they have their boyish manners and their foppish posturing.
Is Utena a Yuri manga?
Only the movie.
Only the movie. Got it. Yeah, that totally scans.
Okay,
Any
I
other-
think I need you to explain that one.
We're already in discourse. Let's go, baby.
I think that would require far too much background. I'm going to veto
I
that.
think I'll leave it short. I think it's
the movie
important
is-
that Utena, the show, is slow, plodding, and bisexual.
Yes, just
Fair.
like so many of us. Any other favorite tropes to throw out, folks?
Gosh.
Like the Rei Asaka or the Oscar, or when you have the really tall, or kind of like the jury plays into this when you have sort of like Hazel was saying, the butch-ish woman who is so terribly troubled and stressed. I like that. I think that's neat.
And her counterpart, like you have your girl prince, and then you also have your evil purple girl. Who, the purple isn't really
evil
necessary.
purple girl,
It's just somehow
yes.
they're always purple.
I'm
Yes,
gonna.
these women who are like toxic and manipulative and destructive, and like they get trapped in these complicated relationships. And
It's Girl Sasuke is what it is.
I want to ask you all, like, I feel like in every snippet of these things that I've ever read, it's like one or the other of the characters has, like, close narration of their internal processes, and the other does not. Like, there's kind of like the insider and the outsider. Is that...
And the other who does not is the tall girl with the long black hair.
Right, it's always the much dreamier girl who is being spoken about, and like the girl who is like less sure of herself, who is like relating her own experience. Am I reading only like a small subsection of things here, or does this track for the whole deal?
That sounds
I think-
pretty on brand for, I would say, a large
That's
portion
pretty
of
common.
Yuri manga. Primarily because a lot of Yuri has very strong shoujo roots, and that is just, in general, I would say, something that happens very frequently in shoujo romance manga.
Yeah, and like that also gets behind the basic shape of, I would say, most Yuri manga, which is one character being like, I refuse to believe this other character is in lesbians with me, and then eventually them figuring out, because one or both of them are idiots, that is in fact what is happening.
But speaking
How
of the
it
basic
works in
narrative
real life, I
structure,
hear.
That is true. I'm not saying it isn't. I would never erase disaster lesbians. It's a real
But
thing.
Yeah.
I think you are missing out the one part of that basic structure, where in between this, maybe around volume 2 or 3 of the manga, this is another great trope, the rival.
Oh,
You
yes,
know, a
of course.
separate character has to come in, like a childhood friend of one of the two girls who, you know, has had feelings this whole time and has just been sitting with them angrily. And maybe she acts on it, maybe she doesn't, but that kind of third act, that third person in the fray, kind of forces the two main characters to get together more. I don't think I've ever seen her win, but sometimes you end up rooting for her if the main couple is boring enough.
A deconstruction is in the future where the rival is the victor in the end.
There's got to be the moment where the character whose narration we do not receive, the dreamier character, reveals their vulnerabilities in a highly dramatic and endearing way, right?
Oh, certainly, yeah. Sometimes it even ends up being a twist in and of itself. Like, I've definitely read a few recent Yuri manga stories, like, one of them's like an isekai, but I can't remember the name off the top of my head, where you're sort of led to believe that is sort of the trope that they're leaning into, and that's the structure of the story. But when you're actually given view into their point of view and their motivations, you find out that perhaps it's a little bit more out of the ordinary than you were anticipating, and perhaps a equally as Yuri, but perhaps different flavor of Yuri.
Cool.
Usually in a toxic, evil women kind of way, but you know what? I'm here for that too.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's
okay.
that's one of my favorite tropes besides the aloof, emotionally frozen long black-haired girl, is that she's secretly evil in some way or another. I really appreciate that, and also I appreciate everything that happens in Citrus. Is that the name of it?
Citrus is
Yes.
Oh,
boy. Citrus is very bad, but it's so aggressively over the top that I just can't look away. It's like a car crash.
I like Yuzu. I really appreciate Yuzu. I don't care for Mai.
But you know, there's essentially, as in a lot of romance media, there is no limit to how wacky things can get on the road to this essential plot point.
I guess I want to ask a
there's-
question that seems like it would be on the lips of many an uninitiated audience member, which is just how lurid are these comics? How male-gazy do they tend to
Yuri
be?
is a really wide genre. So
Yeah,
there's
very
Yuri as pure
wide
romance.
one.
There's Yuri as like a rom-com with insane things happening. There's Yuri as like really aggressive emotional drama. Like Gunjo is a good example of that. And then there's just Yuri as ero manga, stuff that's like directly this is porn. And all of these count.
Yeah.
I think you were saying male gazy there. My impression is that most Yuri manga is actually created by women.
Yeah, there's like an interesting history to sort of the way in which Yuri manga has been
This is
marketed.
not-
Oh,
This
you go
is
the wrong
not-
way.
Oh dear.
This is not the exit word.
Backing up,
Let's
backing
drift
up.
slowly backwards into
I
the
thought
traffic.
it was
Immediate
just crashed
recoil.
into
Somebody?
It was just the truck.
I've definitely
this is a
wrecked
problem.
someone's car.
This is
Oh no! Oh
Wait,
no!
look at the direction my cab is
Just
facing.
pull through it.
We'll
Pull
be
through
all
it.
right. Dude,
You can scrape your
Take
way
out the
against that
sign.
Be a
sign.
hero!
No,
Oh no! Oh!
Wait, you have a double trailer.
I know it's a big problem in this situation.
Oh no.
No. We're
Oh, no.
we're gonna be fine.
Oh, why is that
thank
truck
you for
moving up
stopping.
like that? Come on, dude.
I think we did it. Oh
And-
god!
did
I'm
it!
Stop!
There you go.
I got this oriented.
Audio listeners, thank you for your patience.
This is not an
you have-
audio show. I just want to remind you all that this is a YouTube show.
That
Thank
he
you for
also
listening.
voices a podcast.
It
God, your
does
truck has sweet
occasionally getting
underlighting
interrupted
effects.
by-
Is that normal?
That's pretty cool, isn't it? The back trailer, yeah.
I
Yeah, I
think
guess
that is just the headlights from the car behind you.
Could it be?
Is it? Oh yeah,
Yeah, I think it is.
It absolutely. is.
Well, it would have been a
And
great.
you should
safety
probably
feature.
turn on your headlights.
Let me
also.
turn on my lights.
Yeah, I got
Now that-
RGB
there.
lighting set up on my truck.
All right, guys, we got through it. Where were we?
I was
The
about,
history of
Oh
Yuri.
yeah,
Truck game.
Yeah,
we were talking about the authorship
History
of
of Yuri,
Yuri,
yes.
right?
yeah.
The,
It's kind of interesting in that, like, Yuri has never really had as, like, set an authorship demographic that it markets to, sort of genre in general, pretty much throughout most of its entire history. You get as many, like, I mean, like, it's, I would say, like, 60 to 7%, like, shoujo or marketed towards, like, older women, but there is a pretty distinctly large demographic that also does, like, you know, shonen or seinen manga, and they definitely have like a very different feel to them between the two of them. Like if you were to pick up there used to be like two different magazines that would release Yuri manga weekly, one mainly aimed towards female audiences, one towards male. You could definitely like feel the difference, but in general, like I would say like Yuri almost is distinct from what we kind of consider like gay or lesbian stories in at least the English-speaking world, in that like there's like such a focus on like purity, like especially when you're dealing with like stories dealing with like younger women and stuff, to the point where it's like that sort of luridness is almost kind of verboten in a lot of
You're right.
circles.
Yeah.
Okay.
When I say like you can, and when Kat says you can feel the difference between the ones intended for male audiences and female audiences, that is true, but that doesn't necessarily mean that one of them is more pornographic or more lurid than the other.
I think that a lot of the time what male audiences, not that, you know, I can really speak to much, but like sometimes you just want to read about women having incredible amounts of emotion over each other that isn't, you know, like that can be lurid in its own way, is maybe a better
Yeah.
way to phrase
Yeah.
that.
These are voyeuristic, as a general matter. Like, I mean, I realize that's a big assertion to make, but, you know, it's romance. Romance is about feeling things at a remove, which there's a word for that, which is not coming into my mind right now, so I'll abandon that.
Right.
that
Things
form.
at a remove.
Vicarious, that's the word that I wanted.
I see.
Yeah, it is about vicarious sensations. Also, it should be noted that, like, with this history of Yuri manga, there's an increasing movement now, I think, of a place where a gay female audience and a straight male audience are meeting with media like Love Live, where things can be simultaneously marketed to both gay women and the kind of male audience that does not want to see any male characters at all in their media.
I think Review Starlight is perhaps the shining example of this, because it's essentially asking, what if we took the ritual structure of Utena but made it as marketable as possible by simply not including the men that fuck up the systems of power?
What if we took Utena and
we're including a
extruded
giraffe
it into paste without understanding, like, the whole deal with Akio?
But hey, it has a gotcha game.
Ugh.
You can get all new girls. They ask you every month.
So salty about Kuromaya getting half an episode. I'm never going to be over that. Half a fucking episode. Mihiru gets an entire episode.
These things cause deep feelings, and for the portion of our audience that was equipped to understand that, I'm sure that they resonate with you. So we asked each of you to bring in a particular trope or issue in Yuri manga to throw open to discussion, and I would like to do that, and I would like to go over that in the same order that I introduced people, i.e. the order that you're in the Discord call. Vera, what would you like to bring to the Yuri table?
Oh God, I wanted to talk about gender.
Gender,
which is going to take forever. Yes, so like all of the like fucked up little cross dress, like the way that Yuri manga is going to like always has this overlap where like you could have someone who's like, okay, let me take a moment to rephrase what I was about to say. Hazel, you have a lot to say about this too.
Yeah, I guess so. I think we might as well start this by saying that the primary site for people to read Yuri is, of course, Dynasty Scans. It's just, big compilation of all sorts of Yuri manga. And the one other thing that they seem to host a lot of is a lot of manga about cross-dressing, about trans characters, about, all these other sorts of, strange gender exploration manga.
Which we can call gender manga as a sort of umbrella term.
Gender manga is, I think, the term. So, I kind of refer to these two as the Dynasty Scans Coalition. But it's clear that even though these are generally pretty distinct genres, there's some sort of overlap that causes them to both be on the same site.
Mm-hmm. The need
right, but
for...
the thing about this is that...
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yes. So
whoever
the thing
said
about this
the need
is
for...
that...
That's me.
Never mind.
The kind of need, with Class S and making the girls straight at the end of everything, like Onisama A, and the kind of, like, weird resolution that you get in cross-dressing manga, where it's like, this person was a boy, is... I think those things are tied.
Growing out of it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I figured out my psychological issues, and now I can be straight and cis, and, whoops, it turns out I was just acting queer, but, clearly that made my life easier in some way, as opposed to...
The stars on my problem, or the everything that the guy who made Tatami Galaxy ever made problem also. It just keeps coming up. I don't know why. I'm not going to speculate. But, yes. So there is that sort of related area. Did you have more to dive into with that?
Yeah, it's just intensely frustrating looking at this, and just seeing it not take the frame that I would take for it. Like it's stuff. All of this stuff is written with this frame that can't acknowledge the real existence of transness. That's like, we're going to do cross-dressing, we're going to get so close to this, and the narrative is never going to acknowledge what it's really doing. And at the end, we're going to back out because we couldn't commit to it.
I've always kind of wondered how much of that is sort of people taking trying to do a continuation of the old stage plays. What's the name of the old women's only acting troupe?
Takarazuka?
Yeah, taking
Takarazuka?
that as source material without necessarily really taking a more critical eye to what exactly they're dealing with by broaching the topic of capital G gender.
And it is it's not as though this is taboo, a taboo subject area. Even back in the 90s, saw in anime like trans women characters who were generally older trans women, and they were sometimes played for laughs in the problematic way that these characters were played for laughs in all media back in those days. But in like cases like Tokyo Godfathers, for example, you know, it was treated in a matter of fact way, a way like when characters met, like when your protagonist met the trans character, they were like, oh yeah, that's Mrs. So and so, that's just her deal, right?
Or the classic Dirty Pair screen cap, where it's like, oh well, like 1 in 10 women are trans these days. This is fine.
Yeah, I mean that's from like what, the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
So
It's possible there's actually been backsliding, honestly, in sort of Japanese pop culture from that point. But it's sort of interesting to see that it does feel like there's a kind of top-down censorship keeping these areas from being explored in truly satisfying ways.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, to me it feels kind of related to, like, I don't know, like with the Class S stuff, like, you know, some of it might have been, you know, intended from the start in this sort of reactionary way, like, you know, I'm going to tell the story about, you know, girls working this out for the system. And then some of it you kind of wonder, like, you know, what, like, is this just the only way they knew how to end that? You know, like, in a different time and in a different place, you know, like with different concepts and vocabulary to work with, you know, would they have, you know, would whoever, you know, the person who wrote the story felt more comfortable taking it in a different direction? I don't know.
It is like, particularly with media that is this tropey, there is always like the limitation of what has gone before.
Yeah.
You're either recapitulating or reacting to the genre. There's no real way to escape that when you step into the arena, and
Right.
I think that does circumscribe authorial imagination to a certain extent.
And it's amazing how specific tropes can get codified. I mean, I think the aquarium date's a great example of this. It's such a strange thing to just kind of focus in on. I think another one I noticed in kind of a mixture of gender manga and Yuri manga at large is the kind of magical asexual support character who solves the main character's problems during a moment of crisis. Bloom Into You, which I kind of hold as the benchmark of like Yuri manga. It's, you know, very straightforward, it's very good. It's kind of the peak of what it's trying to do in my mind. It has Maki, who's this asexual boy, probably the most important boy in the main cast, who, you know, helps out the main girl Yu in times of crises by not being able to relate to her romantic experiences and just telling her, hey, get your shit together.
Now, is this like textually asexual, or are you inferring?
Yes, he talks.
Oh, okay.
And this actually ties back to a lot of interesting stuff about how we were talking about how the authors of Yuri manga oftentimes act as flies on the wall, or, you know, voyeurs, or, you know, just kind of looking from afar. Because this is how Maki describes his relationship to the central lesbians in the manga. He's like, oh, you know, I prefer to view this like theater. I like to see other people's relationships in front of me, as opposed to doing this myself. So
I always kind of wished... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
I was going to say, like, I always found, like, that particular, like, chapter to be really interesting, and I really wish Nakatani had done a little bit more with that, because it is such a, like, example of that sort of, like, voyeuristic design. Though, I guess Nakatani, you know, is, from at least what I understand, is a woman, so perhaps didn't feel necessarily, like, in a position to be talking about, like, the sort of male gaze of Yuri manga and whatnot. But either way, I kind of wish they had done a little bit more with that particular scene and that, like, plot line.
Right. There's definitely something there, and I think, you know, more than a few, you know, I think 3 of us in this chat have discussed a Maki closeted trans girl theory just to indulge ourselves. But it's like, and the weirdest thing about this is, like, you know, Maki's an interesting character and that's a cool perspective, but I've seen this reproduced in, like, 2 other manga, enough that I, like, blogged about it once.
Imitating Bloom Into You.
That's true, but, like, Shinamani Tasugare is another great example of this, where it's, you know, kind of a gender manga more than it is just kind of a general gay manga about, like, LGBT topics versus a romance. But we have, the Anonymous, this literally magical, mysterious, asexual woman who kind of swoops in to solve people's problems before promptly departing from their lives.
Anonymous is ex-gender.
Oh. Okay, my bad.
Their whole deal.
And
it's fine, I can see.
Yeah, and then there's this
They're
other
not
manga, which I only remember its abbreviation, Kanaboku, which also has a, asexual teacher who comes in and solves everyone's problems in the midst of gender crisis.
That is fascinating.
So, yeah,
I had no
it's
idea that was a trope.
It's only shown
This
up 3
intensely
times.
circumscribed gender role that has to be created and maintained such that this other thing is allowed to happen. Which, you cannot have this person be a threat to this in any way, because that would kind of pop the bubble.
Right, they're the opposite of the rival.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting to me the way that you relate that back to what the male gaze is looking for in Yuri manga, because I think as far back as maybe the 3rd episode of Trucks Ever, Josh and I had this conversation where we were like, why are so many male comics artists writing lesbians into their comics right now, which was a thing back when Trucks started a million years ago. And or it was a noteworthy thing as opposed to sort of the standard thing that it is at this point. And I was like, well, you could call it fetishism on its face, but I think that it's also a matter of, if you are a dude who is socialized as a dude and you have trouble and you've been also grown up in like the meat grinder that is 4chan or the anime fan internet, which used to be a much harsher place than it is these days, I think. How do you express these feelings? Like how do you
you
like where how can you relate romance and tenderness to yourself? It's very difficult.
It
You
is
need to
not
divorce
an
it from
accident.
you need to divorce it
Trans
from the
woman
historical
so into
baggage
this.
of heterosexuality, is what we described at the time. I believe.
Yeah, but it's like I think it's not even just divorcing it from the cultural baggage of heterosexuality as much as it could be just putting yourself in the shoes of a person who is allowed to feel.
Absolutely.
And there's an interesting angle of how this is actually reproduced in television, particularly American cartoons, where, since you've started the Trucks podcast, we've had, these canon lesbian relationships in Adventure Time, Steven Universe, and She-Ra. And they're all, and like the Owl House, and they're all gay girls. And there's a very specific reason for that. And I think it's that they can be viewed as quote-unquote safe in a way
Right.
that gay guys can't. And like that softness and vulnerability provides an easier, safer venue to explore. So it's interesting the way that's reproduced.
Very true.
And it's also true that all of
Also
these
just-
works is especially inspired by Yuri manga. I mean, there's literal, scene redraws of Utena duels in Steven Universe.
Yeah, Steven Universe is like absolutely saturated with that.
Straight up anime.
Though it's also worth noting that all of these shows, or at least most of them, are created in large part by lesbian showrunners. So it's not as if it's not the same dynamic as like male webcomic artists putting lots and lots of lesbians in things, because these are people who are trying to see themselves.
Right. And it's also true that they had to fight tooth and nail to get it.
Yeah. But I think there is that point that romance between male characters is still seen as a further bridge, or at least through central, not like side character or cameo character.
Yeah.
And hopefully that'll continue to change. Can I ask Joelle what topic you were hoping to bring in?
I was just thinking about like the kinds of feelings that I like to get from Yuri, and there are 2 of them, which are sometimes I like Yuri that makes me like lie on the bed and kick my legs and go, that's so cute, like Mage and the Demon Queen, or
Yes.
just like Crescent Moon and Donut stuff, just like really cutesy stuff. And then sometimes I want stuff that like makes me feel really uncomfortable and bad and upset, like We Know the Devil or Gunjo, which it recently got a film released in English, Ride or Die, that stuck surprisingly well in a lot of ways. Like the sex scene at the end was terrible, but the rest of it, in terms of turning it into an adaptation, not that bad.
Wait, is this like actual like full on adaptation?
Yeah, you can
Actual
watch it
full-on
on Netflix.
adaptation. They got all the arcs in there. They adapted
they
really
can-
different segments.
Okay, no,
What?
yeah,
Her ex in the bath.
All right, folks.
Sorry.
Yeah,
It's
we
okay.
got distracted a bit.
But yeah, those two feelings that you're looking for, and I first of all, I love your characterizing "We Know the Devil" as a Yuri manga.
It is a Yuri manga. It's very
100%
specifically a
Yuri.
Yuri manga.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, does a Yuri manga have to be a manga? No, all it
No,
has to be
it
is
doesn't.
Yuri.
There's of course the other joke. I don't even know what it was in, but I saw it on Twitter where some manga had a scene where they were showing all these like little comics, and one of them was listed as "We Know the Devil too. They fuck this time."
That's just Heaven Will Be Mine.
So
Okay, but like Heaven Will Be Mine was originally pitched
Oh,
as
yes,
lesbian
yes,
yaoi. Like the idea is that it's about gay women, but it's using.
Are
sort
you
of
are you
tropey
trying to
C
go
models.
into original pitches here? Because I've got the a Google search revealed to me a bunch of AVs. Oh, sorry. Go on.
Are y'all still on?
Yes,
Yeah.
we are all
Yeah.
still on.
My
Pause.
Nice.
Truck in.
Unpause.
Truck in. So yeah, we were talking about the two Yuri manga emotions, which are fluff and I'm emotionally scarred.
Fluff and
Fluff
hell.
and angst.
Yeah, and we all need equal measure of fluff and hell. Like, I use Yuri manga, and I think of it this way. I explicitly use Yuri manga as like the most comfort reading of comfort reading when I'm in the worst possible places. Like, when I broke my wrist, I spent the next like 24 hours in bed, like in horrible pain, just reading Yuri manga as a kind of topical anesthetic. I think that's the last
Yeah, I
time.
could-
Last time that
Topical.
I can absolutely relate to that. Like, I know, like, when I was really stressed, like, my last semester of college, I would just, like, binge read whole series over a weekend,
Exactly, yeah.
No, it's a drug.
So
Some of it, but some of it is the
So
bad
is it-
kind of drug. Or,
It's a drug
or
and you're
interesting kind of
smuggling
drug.
it.
Yeah,
I
I'm.
mean,
So there's an argument that this falls into fluff, but where do you class those like rom-coms with just completely insane plots?
Rom-coms are fluff. The makes you feel bad that I'm into is very specifically not like, oh, they can't get together because there's a third girl who just showed up and she's secretly, it
That's
has to
still
be
fluff.
deeper and sharper and more. It has to cut very differently than that.
Is it okay if I say that I feel like these are the two emotions of anime in general? I feel like there's always been this really sharp distinction between the fluffy parts of the anime and the just like, let's get really up close to nihilistic despair parts.
Yeah, I
of
would say
anime.
I'd say that would be pretty accurate. Like I'm thinking about like Akira. It's like definitely a different flavor when it comes to Yuri because just there's just something about some two very toxic women doing some very awful things to each other and everyone around them as the world falls apart. But like it is definitely a
As the
similar-
world falls apart. Good to know that's also what's going on, yeah.
Can I self-indulgently ask the panel which category they think Tepu falls into?
Oh, man.
For me,
Yeah,
I haven't
fluff.
read it yet. I'm sorry.
Fluff.
please.
I think Tepu is the third anime emotion, which is shonen.
Yeah,
That's
Tepu is
Yeah.
actually not a Yuri manga. It's a sports
I think
manga,
lesbian
is my
yaoi
contention.
is a valid category, and we should elaborate on that a little bit.
We will when we get to that.
Sports
question.
Yeah,
manga.
Yuri, but it's yaoi is incredibly valid category.
Kat, what is the topic that you have brought in to discuss?
Ranga, were you Raja? Were you still talking?
Oh, no,
Very,
no,
very
no,
quiet.
go right ahead, go right ahead.
You
Kat.
did? Okay. All right, I'm going.
Kat, you're up.
I'm up. I kind of already touched a little bit on what I was gonna talk about, which was just kind of the indefiniteness, broadness, big tentativeness, if that is a word that I can say, of like Yuri as a genre. Like I mentioned a little bit before about just kind of like how demographically it's truly all over the place. It's not like yaoi manga, which is very sexually explicit, generally geared towards like a female audience and whatnot, versus like gay manga, which is generally meant for gay men. You got like you have a sports series, you have shoujo romance manga, you have like very serious seinen series, and a bunch of other things. It's kind of interesting, but like I guess the point I haven't really super touched on necessarily is sort of this the range of explicitness of the relationships that I think has been a what's the word I'm looking for? Point of conflict, I suppose, that I've noticed, especially in more recent times.
Are you talking about a range of explicitness in terms of sex, or are you talking about a range of explicitness in terms of subtext and text?
Subtext and text specifically. Like, from what I understand, this is like especially like a split between like English-speaking fans versus like Japanese fans as to like what should be considered Yuri. Like, Hazel brought up earlier, like, a Dynasty Scans, and if you ever go into a Dynasty Scans discussion page for anything labeled subtext, you will get probably... One, don't do that. Two, you will likely find, like, 10 pages of people arguing about whether or not it should be considered Yuri or subtext, and people lamenting about the fact that, like, oh, you know, they never got an I love you at the end of the story. There was never a kiss, a handhold, a hug, nothing more than just sort of this, you know, lingering affection between these two female characters at the end of the story. But then you'll, like, I don't know, like, hop onto, like, Yuri Nav, which is a Japanese website. And, like, all of those things labeled subtext on Dynasty Scans are, you know, shoved up into the same category. They're all just sort of considered Yuri. Which
that might just be a baseline cultural difference between, you know, Japanese and American notions of emotional continence, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking a little bit about this before we hopped on, and I also have wondered if so much of, like, the English-speaking world's, like, reaction to those sort of things is a reaction towards, like, American media doing a lot of queer baiting, and how that, you know, like, there's this inherent frustration when you put in a lot of emotion and weight into a particular relationship, and then it never really kind of goes anywhere that you're hoping and expecting. I've always wondered if there are similar frustrations on, like, the end of maybe some of actual, like, you know, Japanese resident lesbians. I do know, like, one example I have of that is, like, I Favor the Villainess, which is a Yuri web novel turned manga turned maybe someday anime, please. That it basically falls into a lot of the same tropes with regards to Yuri, but it's very, like, in certain moments, the main character acts as a sort of, like, mouthpiece for the author, talking about a lot of, like, her personal frustrations as a lesbian with a lot of, like, common Yuri tropes, like the sort of, oh, you know, it's like this pure love, you know, there isn't necessarily anything, like, sexual about it. She's like, no, I'm a lesbian. I would like to have sex with other women. Not in, like, a particularly, like, explicit way, meaning sex this time, but more just a matter of, like, I'm a person, like, a whole human. Like, this isn't a phase. It is, like, a explicit sexual orientation that sometimes gets missed in, like, classic Yuri romance series and a bunch of other things.
The flip side of all of that...
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, so the flip side of all of that subtext is, like, a complete unwillingness of the narrative to acknowledge that, like, lesbian is a thing, and to, like, to note that this even could be romantic. And so you, as the viewer with your lesbian goggles, see that and go, oh, obviously they're in love. Everything it points towards that. But the narrative will never acknowledge that.
Exactly, yeah.
Right. And there's I mean, and going back to your original point about how there's so much variety in Yuri manga subject matter, I think that there is a sense in which, like, Yuri content is viewed as kind of a spice, as it were. Like, you know, just a kind of a punch-up. And also, you know, because, like, all anime, like, so much of this stuff is focused on high school students, you can... there's a whole lot of, oh, you know, this is a phase, but not actually get into what living as a gay person is.
Yuri's kind of moving away from that, I think.
Yeah, I've noticed.
If you're tuned in.
I think that's Hazel's
the recent
subject
trends.
of choice.
Oh, yes.
So we'll get there in just a second. But before that, Ranjur, what were you wanting to talk about? Ranjur, are you still with us?
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
My topic of choice actually sort of goes back to what Joelle was talking about with Yaoi as the ultimate Yuri, or shonen manga Yuri. I'm trying to think of, like, how to phrase it. But what I'm really interested in is, I guess, the Yuri potential of series that combat, exactly, combat.
Ah, yes.
I suppose, like, a lot of the really big Yuri franchise series, like the ones that Toho, Idol series, I suppose you can include in it. Like, it's kind of the meat of the character dynamics comes from this like combat between girls, like Tepu is maybe one of the best examples of it, and that like all the subtext, all the relationship meat, and that is literally focused on physical combat. And this is something that's sort of interesting to me about Yuri is like I feel like the only other place we'd really see like that sort of dynamic, combat dynamic turning into a romance dynamic would be like maybe Yaoi Dojinshi, but like you don't really see that sort of thing in boys' love. I feel like you're not really I don't think there's really quite as much of a like concept of like boys' love battle series, or boys' love tournament series.
I think, yeah. I mean, you see rivals to lovers in fic a lot.
You see it in fanfic, but I don't. But like I'm thinking of like Hayate.
Yeah, why would that be? I'm going to perhaps unforgivably bring up one of my favorite niche porn terms that I stumbled across.
Ah, yes.
Which is res batoru, or les battle.
I found my next screen name. Holy shit.
You've just opened up a whole new world to me, thank you. I've
You
never
two
heard
tops
this
in a
before in
room,
my life.
you let him go.
That alone makes this podcast worth it.
Today we've all learned some valuable things.
Yeah, we found the name for our eventual podcast. It was
Yuri.
Battle.
When you have two women and they like glare at each other and then they pick each other up and throw each other to the ground and like then you get a smug victory quote. The energy of Yuri is absolutely there, and
Right.
Truly.
And
this is kind of what Heaven Will Be Mine is about. But
Yes.
fighting games can absolutely
Yes.
be Yuri. That undercurrent.
There's certainly just some kind of inherent Yuri / homoerotism of two women just fucking brawling it out,
Yeah.
How is this not true of any two people fighting it out?
There's just a certain something, like, okay, alright.
There's a lot of discomfort inherent in men fighting women in that way, like, even at this point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And guys fighting each other is culturally normal. As
Although,
seen
But
in
guys
For a
fighting each other
woman,
is
it's
also very
homoerotic.
homoerotic. Look at
right,
all
but we have like
Metal Gear Solid.
men's pro wrestling is so popular, and so like men's combat sports are so
Is
much
men's
more
pro
common.
wrestling not homoerotic?
Well, yes, okay. Perhaps I chose a bad example. Perhaps the best example should be the tweet of presidential alert: the girls are fighting.
Like, there's something I think about the way that women are not socialized to violence in the way that men are, or socialized to even, like, Toho is not, like, violent. You're not punching or kicking the other person unless you're playing one of the Toho fighting games. But this idea of, like, it's still
Speaking of fighting
competitive.
games.
It's still will against will, kind of like pushing against each other in that way, specifically when it's between women who are usually not expressing this particular impulse in that way. There's
Yes.
something like
It's kind
raw
of
about that, I guess.
an element of the larger transgressiveness of it, I suppose.
Are you
These
doing
girls,
all right, Josh?
these girls are not behaving in a ladylike fashion.
We found it.
Am I doing
found
all
the-
right? Do you think I want to like fight someone? You've met me, Hazel.
Oh no, I was talking to
I'm
Josh, who
not.
was having some severe parking problems.
I was looking for the spot where it would let me sleep.
You can
among
only
the other
nap in a
choice.
very specific place, which is
Sorry.
apparently
And now,
someone
now
and
I'm double
lose.
trailer accordioned in this.
covering
So
up
you
the
guys,
parking space.
I mean, thankfully,
We're just going
I'm
to be
like,
here forever.
I'm like 3 minutes away from the parking spot here, so this is good news. It means that I don't have to find any other way to buy time. You guys, please don't talk about what's happening with the truck at all right now, because I need to give you all as much time as I possibly can.
Right. Good luck.
But yeah, just kind of going back to the whole, like, what makes this different than, like, you know, just standard shonen fight series. Like, even then, just sort of, like, the focus, I think, of some of those fights when you're dealing with something that's very much, like, got the Yuri energy. Like, it's the... oftentimes, like, this culmination of, you know, whatever particular... what's the word I'm looking for? Like, the climax of whatever tension just finally coming undone in the middle of the fight scene. It's more a means of sort of... what's the word I'm looking for here?
It's a sex thing.
Yes, it's a sex
It's
thing.
sex thing, yeah.
Heterosexuality has access to this.
Yes, it does,
It does.
but it's
It does, yeah.
I think
As is so often the
Kaguya-sama
case.
Love is War is the best example of that, in which
Oh.
there
Yeah,
have
no,
these
that's
very
a-
extensive Death Note verbal fights. You know, because to have a physical fight would feel deeply unsettling.
Yeah.
Or that
It could.
it went around everywhere on the internet. That movie poster with the like woman pinning the man to the wall.
Yeah.
That.
Doctor Who,
Yes.
Star Wars, everyone's getting into like, oh, okay, we can have the woman maybe, you know, pin down the man, and that'll be new and cool and revolutionary, but
the decade
this
Hollywood
tension,
discovered
you know.
femdom.
for them, I think that's so important. I think it can be good and important to have a woman just like pick up a person and like, you know, it'd be nice if it was another woman more often, but I'm certainly not against like I think it's important that this exists in the culture as a counterbalance to both as a counterbalance to other narratives, and because I think it's neat personally. I think that's nice. I'm not
No
complaining
personal
about that.
bias or anything, but it's pretty cool when women pick up other women. I'm also in that boat, so I'm making fun of myself as much as you.
There was a brief moment in time when it felt like intergender professional wrestling was going to go mainstream again, but they've all backed away because they're all cowards.
Yeah.
Someday the culture will be ready for it.
Right. And I think just to go off of this tangent a little bit more, I think this kind of, the woman gets to be the girl boss and, beat the shit out of guy is kind of a less comedic form of what we saw in the early 2000s with something like, School Rumble, or really any of those early 2000s, comedy anime, where it was just like, oh, girls get to be violent as, like, a joke.
The girl
Right.
says baka and then hits you with an enormous spiked nail bat, and you die, or
Right, fully coolly.
Yep.
Right. Man, I pour one out for all of the poor men who dated women who were socialized by that and who thought that hitting their boyfriends as hard as they could was appropriate, like flirtatious behavior.
Oh, God, yeah.
Sorry,
Middle
buddy.
school to high school in the aughts to tens. It was a very spicy time to be around anime fans, I will say.
Yep.
The classic yaoi paddle situation.
Oh. All right, Hazel, bring us home. What did
Yeah.
Let's hear about those old ladies. I mean, those office ladies.
Old ladies. We haven't gotten there yet, but I will talk about that. So, we haven't really directly talked about the history of the Yuri genre, and I'm maybe not the best to do this, but basically it emerges from Class S literature, which is a whole genre series in which girls don't actually get to be gay in any meaningful way. You can have them do whatever they want in their little, youthful high school years, but then they grow out of it. And I think it's from Class S and the revival of Class S in the 90s that a lot of modern Yuri manga starts getting its tropes. And that's why they're all in high school, and why the, more masculine girl isn't actually really butch, but it's just tall and dark-haired, and that's really that.
Japanese people really just constantly having ideas about youth, huh?
Yeah, no, it's a thing.
One important thing to note about like the Class S things is they're also like, at least in like the traditional sense, like very explicitly like women's only like high schools and middle schools. So there is just an entire
Yeah.
like lack of.
If there was a boy here, surely we would do that, but we must practice.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. In a sense,
Hence the enormous
the
focus
original-
on
the
purity
author behind
and
this whole
friendship.
Whoa!
Sorry.
If only a bland, personality-free harem manga
Protagonist was here.
but with like stuff like Review, Starlight, and Love Live, they've realized
If,
that it's
if
better
only
if they
that
don't
bland
exist.
harem protagonist could dress up as a girl and go to the girls' school.
This happens
I
in
know.
my
Go
favorite
on.
plant manga,
I know.
Legal Drug.
I
It's
know.
great.
But anyway,
To
yes.
have
I'm about to.
I would like to see something where you have obvious romantic tension between two women and this completely normal, boring, bland harem protagonist guy as like the mechanism for that. When like, you know, usually like sometimes you'll have something where like, oh, two men have like a dynamic going on, and Metal Gear Solid is of course the prime example of this, and it's like being acted out through a woman. I'd be interested in seeing like
the opposite of that.
the opposite of that.
gender
So
Just
swap.
no more
because,
harem
like, it
manga,
doesn't
but
really
rather
happen
harem
in the same way.
politics manga.
Yes, I would love a harem politics manga. It wouldn't
Anyways.
be good, but I'd like to see it for the novelty.
Yeah.
Anyways, hey,
So,
go ahead and
to bring
continue
us
on.
back, so we've kind of finally gotten to a point in the last couple of years where a lot of manga authors, Yuri manga authors, are finally starting to get past the, everything has to either be in high school or be Toho. And we're starting to see a pretty large base of Office Lady manga, or OL, which, you know, will generally star just a woman in her 20s or maybe early 30s working a dead-end job, always in like systems development and stuff like that. I don't really know why that is, but that's just the go-to ladies' job they have.
The most
And to be fair,
pointless job that you could possibly
just the most
conceive
generic
of,
job.
right?
Hey, it's better than secretary, you know. At least they're
Yeah.
getting some sort of cool job. So it's interesting to see this kind of new setting show up and be very common and start getting tropified. I think it's definitely a better development than having everything be in high school, because it means, you know, you get to have adults trying to do adult relationships, even if most of them are still emotionally childish. They're usually
Adults
like,
can be
oh, I was
emotionally
sheltered and I
childish.
didn't have any relationships growing up or anything like that. But you do run into some interesting dynamics more often, and I kind of am wondering. So I think a lot of this is rejection of Class S, as well as like a whole generation of Yuri manga artists having done their thing. So now people are kind of looking for a little bit of an older audience, and I do wonder if we'll keep getting older and older Yuri manga focused characters until we do get old lady manga like you Freudian slipped earlier, Isaac.
Tell me about the old.
That's
I
the,
like
that's
it,
the
I
dream.
like it.
Like two Hayao Miyazaki style grandmas living together. Mm-hmm.
Or two Miyazaki style grandmas getting in sword fights, for that matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sword King.
I hope they still go to the aquarium. I hope they still have insane, evil purple girl drama. But they need to be 85.
That's the
We
dream.
need all you Locktoon people need someone to ship Aiglamine with.
When I am old, I shall wear purple and interfere with the romance of my two lesbian friends. I think we managed this. I'm actually kind of astonished that it went as smoothly as it did.
Everyone got through their questions.
Yeah.
Did it
Yeah.
happen?
We did it. We
Yeah.
did the whole thing.
Wow.
I'm
Against
really
all
impressed
odds.
with everybody.
Yeah.
Does that mean it's time
Yuri
to
is good
park
taste.
this truck? Let me just. I was hoping that would be like a lot faster. I wanted it to be like ridiculously faster.
Well,
than
back it
I
up again. Do
zoomed
it again. Let's see.
out. Okay, let's pretend I'm zooming out slowly again, right?
Uh-huh.
Let's pretend
Alright.
I did it all the way out to like here. You can see that whole parking lot. The
Oh,
road's
and the
starting to
endless
disappear.
void.
Okay, yeah.
The whole
and
of the
let's go to like
world.
fly speed 500. Let's.
Whoops.
Where are
I'm
we?
a squirrel.
Now we are
I'm
but
a
ants on
squirrel
the
waiting
ground.
for my chance to cross
Truly,
the
this
street.
is Yuri.
The question that this
Blank.
podcast has raised is not so much what is Yuri as what isn't Yuri.
It's true.
What isn't?
Yeah.
I think in that we
This,
must refer to the Other Side Picnic's author's insane interview about
Oh, boy.
the Yuri of two animals fighting or an empty landscape.
Oh my god, I love that.
He gives that interview, and then he goes on to write a very slow burn series, which I'm told eventually has real quality Yuri, but to the point that I have gotten to is just two women fucking around in the zone, and one of them really likes talking about how pretty the other one is. Just very funny to me.
If an empty landscape can be Yuri, that also can be Yuri, surely. Like,
My ideal Yuri is straight up adaptation of a Stalker movie, but they've all got boobs.
yes, that'll work.
Nice.
Yep.
And also, yeah, it's like jazz. It's the Yuri that they don't play. That's what you need to be paying attention to. All right, thank you all so much for joining us for this actually quite successful, I thought, experiment.
Yeah.
And we will see you all later.
It's
Have a
been
good one,
Yuri.
everybody.
Thank you for
Let's
summoning
begin.
the Yuri
I'll
Council.
hang up right now.
Yes, this meeting of the lesbians has concluded.
Back to your U-Hauls. All right.
Let me in your U-Haul, Hazel. Let's fold out here.
We're already moved in, though.
You guys, now that we've stopped recording, can I ask, is there a heterosexual Toho?